Hello everybody and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. Just a couple things. First of all, some of you are taking advantage of the free membership, which includes some recipes, articles from our library. You get to participate in one Conversations with Pam session, interactive Q&A. I do 2 of them a month, and those are always fun and interesting. And you can have a conversation with one of our staff here about your interests and get some direction if you're interested in improving your health or careers or whatever. And of course, keep those inquiries about careers coming. I love talking to you guys about how you can be helpful and helping us turn the system upside down from the outside, give people better options for their health issues, and etc. Okay, so I've been warning consumers, as you know, to investigate any and all recommendations made by health professionals in non-emergency situations before deciding what to do. And that is an important qualifier. You know, if you're in an accident, you're bleeding out on the street, I don't think you need a baked potato and a copy of my book, all right? You definitely want to go for whatever doctors want to do. But short of that, check things out. And the reason is that most providers don't fully inform patients of the risks and benefits of the things that they recommend. And so if you make a decision and you don't have all the pertinent data, very seldom do good things happen. And so one of my goals, and this is one of my big time goals that I want to accomplish before the end of my life, is I want to get legislation passed that would make it illegal to not fully inform patients. Just like it's illegal to mislead people when they're borrowing money for a mortgage or buying a house, or I think it would be great if we had this kind of consumer protection laws in place for medicine too. I'm sure that some people watching this, doctors and drug companies, wouldn't like that idea at all, but I like that idea and I think it would help people. Well, I'm going to give you another reason to check things out before taking action. Surveys show that some health professionals outright lie about some things, and some of them think that they're pretty justified in doing it. So according to a Medscape survey, 12% of physicians reported that it was okay to lie about a medical error. Nurses appear to be a little more honest. Only 4% of them said it was all right to do it. 18% of doctors said they weren't sure. Apparently not sure if you should lie or not. That's kind of interesting. 13% of nurses said they weren't sure if it was okay to lie about medical errors. Almost 75% of doctors said they would lie if the error was serious enough that it could result in a malpractice suit against them. 75%. Lying is not limited to situations in which doctors make mistakes. When telling patients about their prognosis, 24% of docs said it was sometimes okay to lie. 8% of nurses thought it was okay to do it. Some were unsure about whether or not it was okay to lie to patients about their potential outcomes. So the uncertainty, 14% of doctors, gosh, I don't know if it's all right. 15% of nurses. When asked if it's okay to lie in order to get reimbursed for treatment, 29% of doctors and 23% of nurses thought that that was A-okay. 16% of doctors and 19% of nurses weren't sure if they would lie or not. I don't know about you, but this is very concerning to me. When asked whether or not they had actually lied about any of these issues, 17% of doctors said they lied to a patient about a medical error, 14% had lied about a prognosis to a patient, and 26% had lied in order to get a treatment approved for reimbursement. 45% of doctors said they never lied about anything. That is less than half. Not good. Nurses seem to be less challenged about telling the truth. 6% reported lying to patients about a medical error or prognosis. 10% said they lied to get reimbursement for patients, and 62% said they didn't lie about anything. Some of the comments made by survey participants were quite telling. One psychiatrist wrote that while he generally thought that honesty was the best policy, quote, under certain circumstances, telling the truth might cause more harm than benefit to the patient. Sometimes an illusion you can live with is better than a truth you cannot live with. I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, you know, honesty is the best policy except when I decide it's not, I guess is what he's saying. An internist expressed confusion about the difference between lying and wishful thinking. He wrote, I've often been accused by surviving family members of lying about prognosis and giving them false hope. My customary response is that doctors have a right to hope too. That was a quote. Medscape has conducted some other similar polls. One conducted in 2017 showed that 43% of doctors thought it was okay to lie in order to protect a colleague. 38% said it could be justified if it didn't harm the patient. 5% said okay to do even if it hurts the patient. Again, the nurses tended to be a little more trustworthy, with only 17% reporting that they would lie to protect a colleague, but only if the patient was not harmed. Only 1% would do it if it involved harming the patient. When asked whether or not they had actually lied to protect somebody else, 24% of doctors said they had, 14% of nurses said that they had. One respondent called lying for coworkers, quote, medicine's dirty little secret. Health professionals stated that peer pressure was one of the reasons for lying to others. Okay, so it's okay to do when I'm under pressure from others. Telling the truth seems to be a challenge for some of these people. 8% of doctors reported an extreme amount of peer pressure. 21% reported quite a bit, and 41% reporting some pressure from colleagues. Nurses experienced about the same level of pressure. 5% said extreme pressure, 22% quite a bit of pressure, and 47% said they had received some pressure. And when I was reading this, I was thinking about when I was a kid. And you know how your mom and dad give you these sayings all the time about the things you're supposed to do in the whole 9 yards. And one of the things in my household, and I used to roll my eyes, but now I kind of appreciate what my parents told me. But one of the things when my sister and I used to say, everybody's doing it. You know, why can't we do this? Everybody else can do it. My mother used to say, well, if everybody else jumps off a tall building tomorrow, are you going to do it too? And I used to go, oh my gosh, you know, I'm talking about staying out till 1 in the morning and she's talking about jumping off buildings. But her point was really well taken, that your decision to do certain things should not be based on what a whole lot of other people are doing or what everybody else is pressuring you to do. It should be because you're making a decision about what is the right thing for you to do based on your values and ethics. And I couldn't understand that when I was 13. I was just angry about it. Fortunately, the message got through, and so I think I practice good ethics when I'm dealing with people now. Well, this is extremely distressing, I think, to anybody who would hear it, but I want to talk a little bit about how people experience this in everyday life in a doctor's office. Well, all patients can be harmed by lying or withholding or whatever you want to call this that these doctors are doing. But cancer patients might be the most vulnerable. For example, the prognoses for patients who have lung cancer or glioblastoma are really grim. I mean, survival rates are really low. So if a doctor is not forthcoming about the prognosis, this might keep patients from seeking other treatments. In other words, if the treatment you have doesn't really extend my life at all, maybe I'll seek something else, or maybe I'll decide not to undergo harsh treatment just so I can have a better quality of life during my remaining time on the planet. You can't make a decision like this if you're not given the right information that allows you to make an informed decision. If a medical mistake is made, instead of owning up to it, it's likely that a doctor will lie to patients in order to avoid a malpractice suit, and even worse, his coworkers are likely to circle the wagons and lie for him or her, lessening the chance that the patient or her family will get compensated for injury or death. And I remember a trial lawyer telling me that one of the things that was common in his practice, he sued a lot of doctors for malpractice. And this guy was really ethical. I knew him very well. And he said, I don't take cases where people are being opportunistic. He said, I take cases where it's just crystal clear that something terrible happened and it was the fault of an individual in practice. And a lot of time it was almost like callous disregard for what was going on. And he said a significant percentage of his cases would get settled when usually a nurse or somebody on the staff, he said it was rarely a doctor that would come forward, but a nurse would call 3 weeks before the cases were supposed to go to trial and say, hey, I copied some documents before they were changed, and I kept them, and I thought I should come forth, and I didn't, and now I'm starting to be really uncomfortable about the fact that I didn't come forth. And then this attorney told me once he had the documents, he would call the other side and say, I have some information that I think we should sit down and go over, and then you can decide if you want to go to court or not. And he said about half of his cases got settled based on somebody coming forward in a hospital setting or whatever and saying, you were given inaccurate information, I really have the accurate information, and here it is. Well, there's another issue about this too. It's the overall culture that permits this type of behavior to go on. In other words, if lying is generally tolerated, and it seems that they all know that they're doing it, in some areas the inference can be that perhaps it's okay to lie in other areas too. And I've found that the more people lie, the more lies they tend to tell. I've met some people who seem to be very challenged when it comes to telling the truth about stuff, and it doesn't seem to be limited to one area of their lives. I mean, I've had people here who worked here. I mean, one of the reasons we got rid of people is lying and stealing, but we've had people who lie when the truth fits better. In other words, you could have just told me that you left the house later, you slept in, and instead you made up this tall tale, and why don't you just tell me what happened? We don't really have to make up stories about simple things, but when you have a culture that encourages this type of behavior, it tends to get worse instead of better and seep into all kinds of areas. It's very concerning. So the prevalence of lying and incompetence and the fact that so little of medicine is practiced according to evidence means I think you can make a pretty good case for informed decision making, for consumers being knowledgeable about this. And really, when it comes right down to it, you hear a lot, and there's been a lot of media publicity about the misbehavior in the financial field, for example. In the mortgage business, remember the collapse in 2008 based on people borrowing money that they couldn't pay back and the inflated cost of houses and all kinds of misbehavior. And there are consumer protection laws in place that would disallow some of that, and some people went to prison for doing it. So we seem to have an idea that this behavior is not a good idea in other areas of life. But more important, consumers seem to have the idea, and they always have to a certain extent, that when you're buying stuff from people, you really are cautious about it, you know? I've seen people put more effort into choosing a blender than choosing a doctor, or hiring somebody to rake their leaves than having a procedure. And I think if we just approached medicine the way we approach everything else, which is to use those skills of investigating and asking questions and taking time to think about something before you make a decision, a lot of this grief could be avoided. Now, to be clear, there are some very good and conscientious doctors who tell the truth, and they use very high moral and ethical standards in their practices. I mean, I think about doctors like Neil Barnard and Caldwell Esselstyn and some of the great people in my field, and how they have set such a high ethical standard for themselves. And we don't want to overlook those people. If medicine were entirely populated with people like that, well, my gosh, I'd have to find something else to do with my time, because we wouldn't need to be creating videos like this all the time, and we wouldn't have to worry so much about informed decision making and being a third party that helps with that kind of thing. But unfortunately, that's not the case right now, and so it really is buyer beware. And I found this information frightening. It certainly made me happy to be informed and to be a little cautious, not so anxious to hang out with doctors and do everything that's recommended. So anyway, somebody told me on a comment not too long ago, "You're always talking about something negative." I could just hear the whining in the voice I'm imitating. And I wrote back, it's never negative to know the truth about something and to be informed. In fact, the negative thing is walking around in an ignorant state and not knowing the dangers that you're facing and the challenges that you're facing in dealing with things. Better to be upfront about it. So if it's perceived as negative, sorry about that, but most people are happy to be educated, and that's what I think my role is. All right, hit the subscribe button, pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it, and I will be back to you next week with more news.